everyone. Welcome to another episode of Adoption and Beyond. I'm Nicole Fowler, Director of Social Services at Adoptions from the Heart and the co-host of this podcast.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyse White, Social Service Program Manager at Adoptions from the Heart and the other co-host of this podcast.
Today, we are thrilled to host a special guest, Isaac Etter, who I have followed on social media for a long time since he has provided trainings for Adoptions from the Heart, and just talking to him has been so educating and fascinating. Isaac is a passionate social entrepreneur, adoptee, and the founder of Identity, a groundbreaking startup dedication to empowering adoptive and foster families.
Isaac was adopted transracially at the age of 2, and his journey fuels his deep commitment to creating spaces for meaningful conversations around race, identity, and adoption.
In this episode, Isaac will share his story and the motivations behind his work, diving into the complexities of transracial adoption and the critical role that racial and identity development play for adoptees.
So whether you're a parent, adoptee, or professional, this conversation promises to be both inspiring and insightful. So please join us as we learn more about Isaac and the work he does. Isaac, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So are we. We would love if you don't mind starting off by just sharing a little bit about yourself, your adoption journey, and really just what led you to become an advocate for transracial adoption education.
Yeah, so I was adopted when I was 2, transracially. And I think throughout my life, I struggled with a lot of identity challenges, a lot of issues around adoption, struggling with some of those grief and loss things that many adoptees struggle with. And especially as I got older, some of the racial elements became really hard for me, especially not growing up around people that look like me. And so I think throughout my experience as adoptee, even though my parents loved me, even though I had a relatively great upbringing, I still had all these kind of gaps in my story and in my awareness. And as my parents started to learn more about my journey and in my struggles and started to recognize it, and we started to have deeper conversations about it when I was an adult, it led me to become a little bit more passionate about engaging in these conversations in general. I guess it was 2018, 2019 that I first started doing this work. And ever since, I've been really working, day and night to try and create resources that help adoptive and foster families. And a lot of our stuff is around transracial adoption because it's my story. And I feel like I've spent so much time working and learning about it.
So it is now time for our What's Buzzing segment. Today, you guys, I have a press release from Washington's 9th District where they are highlighting a legislation led by Representatives Smith and Bacon and Senators Hirono and Collins on grant citizenship to international adoptees. So I'm going to read an excerpt from this article. It is a little bit long, and I will put the link in our description so you guys can read the whole thing. But let me read some of this so you guys get an idea of what this legislation is trying to do and the reason why they're doing it, and then we can hear some of your thoughts. So it says, Representatives Adam Smith and Don Bacon and Senators Matt C. Hirono and Susan Collins introduced the Adoptive Citizenship Act of 2024, which would grant U.S. citizenship to international adoptees who were legally adopted in the U.S. as children but lack citizenship status due to a loophole in the Child Citizenship Act of 2000. Through no fault of their own, there are an estimated of tens of thousands of people in the United States who were brought here as children to be adopted but never received citizenship status because of the gap in the law. The Adoptive Citizenship Act will close this loophole and provide much needed certainty for these adoptees who were raised in the U.S. and built their lives here, said Representative Smith. These adoptees deserve full access to their rights as American citizens. We must get this legislation passed and signed into law to finally give these adopted citizenship status in the place they call home. As the father of 2 adopted children, I can't imagine the uncertainty and anxiety faced by these adoptees who were legally adopted in our country, but are now being told they aren't U.S. citizens, said Representative Bacon. While this situation was rectified for newly adopted children when the law was passed in 2000, adoptees from before that year were left in limbo land. Imagine being allowed to vote, paying into Social Security and enjoying other rights as a citizen, and then being told you are not a citizen. It makes zero sense, and the legislation corrects the egregious mistake. For years, thousands of internationally adopted children from American families across the country have had to live with uncertainty and fear with U.S. citizenship due to an oversight in the Child Citizenship Act, said Senator Hirano. The Adoptive Citizenship Act would provide a long overdue solution to fix this oversight by simply confirming the citizenship status of international adoptees who had already turned 18 when the Child Citizenship Act took effect. I'm proud to join my colleagues in introducing this legislation to help ensure these adoptees are afforded the rights they deserve as U.S. citizens. It is simply not right that international adoptees who were legally adopted in the United States are being denied citizenship due to a loophole in current law, said Senator Collins. Our bipartisan bill would address this loophole and allow these individuals to finally achieve their rightful status as American citizens. Families who adopted children from abroad were previously required to go through a lengthy process to naturalize and gain U.S. citizenship for their adopted children. Sometimes the necessary paperwork was not entirely completed, and significant numbers of adoptees grew up years unaware that they were living in the U.S. as non-U.S. citizens. Okay, Nicole and Alyse, we know the importance of this legislation, most importantly because now that the former President Donald Trump has won the election, he has promised to crack down on immigration, on illegal immigrants in the United States. So without getting too into politics, I just want to know from your guys' perspective, what are your thoughts about this legislation and why you think it's important, and why do you, or how likely do you think this is to pass, and for these older adoptees who came here before the year 2000 to be able to get citizenship in the United States?
It is absolutely their right to get citizenship in the United States, is where I stand. They had zero choice in being adopted by Americans. So I say let's make it right. And I respect the act that was in 2000, and we need to make it well beyond that. And I would see no reason, and I would hope that there would be zero roadblocks to giving children who were adopted by Americans unwillingly, to their choice or not, the right to citizenship.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly, Nicole. If they were adopted and they reside in the United States, this is their home country. And to even think about the possibility of taking them out of the only home they've ever known is horrifying, to be honest. And like Nicole said, I would hope that there would not be any roadblocks to getting that legislation passed.
Definitely. Well, thank you guys so much for your perspective, and we'll get back to our conversation.
Would you mind just speaking a little bit more to some of the unique challenges or even experiences maybe that you faced growing up as a transracial adoptee that really made you want to do this with your life's work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from an early age, being of a different race from my family was very self-conscious. You know, I remember being 10 years old and being embarrassed to look different from my parents, and ashamed to look different than my parents, right? And that those feelings were so strong as I just wanted to fit in, right? It wasn't anything my parents said or anything anybody in my community said, but I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to look like my parents. I didn't want questions about why my parents looked different than me. And so those experiences really were hard for me. There was also just, when I went to college, I experienced, the first time being out in the world without my adoptive parents, right? First time I was in communities where people didn't know I was adopted off the bat. And so I experienced racism and bias for the first time, and that was really hard. And as I met other adoptees, especially transracial adoptees, I realized that we were not alone in that experience, where we would kind of go out into the world and we didn't realize it, but our whole world, we had had kind of a shield over us, right? If we were in a tight-knit community, if we were in a community where people knew that we were adopted, we often got treated differently. But now that we're out in the real world, where people don't have the context of adoption, where people don't know my family is just as white as they are, I don't get treated the same way anymore, and that can be really shocking and heartbreaking and difficult for adoptees. And so experiencing those things myself, I had my own identity crisis. I went through my own journey trying to find myself, trying to figure out who I was as a Black person, where I fit into that, what that meant for me as somebody who grew up in a white home. And as I kind of got through my own journey, as I found my own healing and my own understanding and my own confidence in who I was, um, I only ran into more and more adoptees who were still struggling, right? More and more adoptive parents who were struggling to connect with their children over this, right? To understand what they're going through. And that really springboarded my work into it. You know what I mean? It creates the passion for it. And many of these people that have had these struggles, they're people that I would consider friends now, right? We all maybe do a little bit of this work in some way or another. And I talk to families every day that are trying to understand the experience that their child's going to have as an adult, and they're trying to do it earlier, which I think is better, right? I didn't get this awareness or this understanding until I was an adult, 17, 18, 19. And so, a lot of my work focuses on how can parents have these conversations earlier? How can they prepare their children earlier? How can their children go out into the world and not have this big culture shock, and be prepared for it? And so my experience definitely have influenced a lot of the work that we do.
Thank you for sharing all of that background and sharing about your life and your experiences. We do have these conversations, and we've discovered that so many more prospective adoptive parents are more educated about what we call the umbrella of white privilege and starting there. But what really can be challenging is actually starting those conversations with your children who you have, had since they, for a long time or a short time. What have you learned about like child development and how to start those conversations?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is you start the conversations as early as possible, and of course you be age appropriate. We break this down. I have a guidebook. We have this series of guides called Practical Guides, and our first one is on transracial adoption, and I wrote it, and it actually gives parents a breakdown of the best things to do at each age group. So 0 to 5, 5 to 12, 12 to 18, and 18 and beyond. And some of that is those conversations as well. And so in that 0 to 5 category, we talk about how it's about how you have your home set up. It's about how you talk about their skin, their culture, and how you also embrace different elements of their culture. We might think about hair, right? What could it mean for your child if you always dread doing their hair, if it's very notable that it's a bad time for you? And so, like, how do we kind of foster this environment in our home where we really appreciate differences and we make our child feel good about their differences? And those, I think, start when you're in that 0 to 5. Whereas when you get to 5 to 12, that kind of elementary years where they're starting to notice more consciously that they look different than you, where comments might be starting to be said about it, that's when you actually have to be very intentional in engaging in the conversations, starting those conversations, finding a day after school where you can go and get ice cream or a Happy Meal or whatever it may be, right? And trying to, kind of ask open-ended questions to your child about maybe their experience at school, ask about any comments that may be being said to them. Hey, has anybody, asked you about your family at all? And you start to try and try to open up this dialogue for your child. And what I think this allows your child to do is, one, know that you welcome the conversation, but then also start to feel safe to actually express what's going on and maybe some of their true feelings. Adoptees often feel scared to talk about these conflicting emotions, whether it be how it feels for somebody to say or ask them about how their family looks different, or if it's that they're struggling trying to understand adoption, trying to understand how they got placed for adoption. These feelings start in these years for many adoptees, these elementary years. And so by spending these years, and I kind of jokingly say these are the years to do it because they're not old enough to hate you yet, but they're not young enough to not understand you yet, right? Because we know teenagers don't love to talk as much, right? They don't want to have these conversations. But when you catch them in this kind of like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 range, it really allows you to set a standard for what open conversation and communication could look like. And I think adoptees often learn from an early age to hide their pain. They learn from an early age, whether it's through how the world talks about adoption or how maybe community talks about adoption, that if they feel bad or sad at all about adoption, that they're wrong for it. And so by you even at this early stage, engaging in this conversation, opening up the door, letting it be known that they can bring those feelings to you, it really creates a really beautiful bond and attachment to your child. And so we always really suggest that for people, especially from 5 to 12. Those I think are some of the most important years. And then as you kind of get into those teenage years, that kind of 12 to 18, you're preparing them for how the world is going to be, right? Hopefully, because you've had the conversations already, they still feel open to talk to you. But obviously, we know teenagers are all different. Sometimes they pull back a little bit. But you still have a responsibility to get them ready for the next season, right? Which is college, adult life, and all those things. So you slowly start to have conversations with them about race, racism, how other people may perceive them. I use examples like, teaching our children like where and when to play with like airsoft, Nerf, and BB guns, right? If we have boys or girls that like doing that, um, what does it mean for you to teach your child that maybe that's a better activity for a backyard than a front yard, right? And talking about how we can't control other people's bias or perception, even though we don't believe that. What would happen if somebody who did have these perceptions, these biases, these, undertones, what if they passed by and saw a little black boy with what looked like a gun pointing it at other kids? Their perception might be totally different than yours or mine, right? And so we slowly teach our kids how, even though we don't agree with it, people have these perceptions, these biases that are shaped by different experiences that they've had. And because we can't control them, we want to do whatever we can to be safe. We think about this in conversations with law enforcement as well, right? We don't want to paint all police officers as bad, but how do we prepare our children to have healthy and safe conversations with law enforcement? And so these are the years where we're preparing our children for these things in ways that I think are meaningful and help them understand that they may be treated differently in some settings. And you're always making sure that you frame it to where you don't believe that they should be treated differently, right? You're placing yourself as somebody who, I don't agree with these actions, but I want you to be prepared for them if they happen. And it's preparing them for what really will inevitably happen in some degree or another, right? It's not like every person is going to experience like the most vicious racism out there, right? They're not going to immediately turn 18 and get called the N-word every day, right? That's not what's going to happen. But we do know that there can be, people can follow you around in stores. We know that you can get pulled over. We know that you can be, whether it's like going for a loan or anything like that, you can be discriminated against. So we know that there are some of these smaller ways, some of these microaggressions that happen throughout a people of color's lives that your child will inevitably experience. And so it helps them give a reference for it and not feel almost crazy about it. Because that was my experience and so many other adoptees' experience because we weren't prepared for it. We were like, why all of a sudden do I feel like everybody sees me completely different, right? We're just preparing them. And then once you get to that 18 range, you can really start thinking about kind of leaning back in and being a support system, right? They might go and try to find answers about their story. They may find hard things about their story, right? We know that, adoption can happen for a multitude of reasons. Some of those are just a mother or a father isn't prepared. Some of those are a little bit more complicated and harder. And so we never know what our children are going to find as they get older. And so I think if you followed all these steps, by the time you get to this 18 and beyond, you have the ability to have more open and honest conversations and be there for your child in a new way, as they may uncover complicated things about their story.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And it brings up a lot of great points in that parenting alone means a lifelong journey of educating yourself, right? Parenting an adoption, parenting an adopted child adds another layer. Parenting transracially adds another layer. And so I'd love to know for those folks and individuals who are parenting transracially and have a different lived experience than their child is going to have, right? What resources do y'all provide at Identity that you just feel are different than the traditional post-adoption education that most families are receiving that they can maybe come to you for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start with some of the free stuff that I think is really engaging and fun. So, one of the things that we have is a podcast. Me and my mom have a podcast called Inside Transracial Adoption. Every single month, we sit down and we talk about different things from my childhood, different things that we're experienced. It's a mix of kind of like what it was like when we were growing up and also modern, right? Like, what are we going through now and talking about now and reflecting on? And so it gives parents, I think, a really inside look at it. My dad has been on it. My sister's been on it. Like we bring other members of the family involved. So you really get a good family perspective. which I think is really missing. I think a lot of families really want to see how this looks in 10, 20 years versus just today. Because day one can be scary and daunting, and you're not sure what's going to happen. You're not sure how your child's going to feel about adoption. You're not sure what conversations they're going to want to have, right? But to be able to kind of look at not a finished product, I wouldn't call us that by any means, but to be able to look in the future, me being in, my late 20s, my mom, being almost done raising kids in general, to get a look at what their future might be like, I think is really helpful for parents. And then we also have a 4-part docu-series, and it's on my story and my family story. And so you'll get to hear more about my upbringing, more about my parents' perspective while raising me. You'll get to hear a little bit more about that racial element. And then you also get to see a little bit of my healing journey, what it was like for me to kind of come to terms with some of my own feelings of abandonment and rejection, and how I worked through those and found a lot of forgiveness and grace from my birth parents. And then we also talk about the work that we do. And so those are 2 really free resources that you can just go onto our YouTube, identity.learning, and watch anytime. We do have a couple paid resources that you can definitely engage in. So we have 3 guidebooks in our practical guide series. Our first one is called Adoption After Infertility, which was our latest release. It was released in May, which was written by Dr. Nicole. I feel like this has been a resource that has been needed for a long time. My work is specialized in transracial adoption, so it wasn't top of mind for me to put out. But as we've grown at Identity, it felt really important to me that we put a resource there that was impactful for parents. It's one of the main reasons people think about, consider, or pursue adoption, right? And so Adoption After Infertility will actually walk you through some of the grief and loss connected to infertility. It has guided journal prompts that walk you through that journey into making an adoption plan, into what you should be thinking about as you pursue adoption. And we found that people who have already adopted appreciate a lot of some of that journal prompting and some of that learning, as well as people who have not even entered into adoption yet get a lot out of it. And so I really love that resource of ours. It's our latest one. It came out in May. And then we have a practical guide, Transracial Adoption, which I wrote. You already got kind of a sneak peek at that resource. It tells a little bit of my story, a little bit about understanding bias and racial identity development, and then it gives our practical guide to transracial adoption. And I almost forgot, I just added a chapter this year. There is a chapter on what is transracial adoption and a transracial adoption assessment in it as well. And so you get a little bit of the history of transracial adoption. I think many times people wonder, why after I transracially adopted did I feel like it just got complicated? Why do I feel like people had mixed opinions on transracial adoption all of a sudden? They adopt and they hear, people of color not liking it, maybe other people in their community not liking it. And I think the history of transracial adoption kind of speaks to some of that. And so I kind of give people a basis of like, this is why you might get some mixed reactions to you being a transracial family. And here's how I think we find hope and navigate it and build a better future. And so really love that update of the guide that just came out, gosh, like a month ago. The guide has been out for 2 or 3 years now, but I update it every year. And then there is also a chapter with my mom. And then our last guide is a practical guide, Black Hair Care. Hair care is one of those resources that adoptive parents, foster parents have always needed. I've come across very, very few states or agencies that have really robust hair care support. It's a very hard thing to offer. It's not top of mind for most agencies, and that makes total sense. But a lot of the work that we do at Identity is trying to bridge that gap. How do we bring those to adoptive and foster families in an accessible way? And so our practical guide, Black Hair Care, will walk you through why it's important to understand your child's hair, why it's important for you to do their hair and learn how to do their hair and teach them how to do their hair. But then it also has QR codes at the end of every chapter. And so you can actually scan the QR code and then go watch a video module on what you just read about. Hair care is something that you need a little bit more of a visual on, and that's really important to us that people take in the learning, that it's not just, one type of learning. And so if you want to know about curl patterns or porosity, you can read about it, kind of get that knowledge base, and then go watch a video of our hair care trainer, Taria, actually doing what you just read about. And so it makes it really hands-on, really practical for families. And that's why I love the way that we do things. And then we also have a community for adoptive parents called Thrive. And so you can join that and kind of have access to monthly resources, monthly Q&As with me and my mom and our hair care trainer, as well as we're going to have quarterly webinars starting in 2025. So we have a lot of stuff that you can engage in.
This is fascinating. That is wonderful resources and um, of hair care, absolutely extremely important hair and skin care, and because it's going to be different than your child's no matter what, but especially transracially, and the importance and culture behind that as well. And I love that you touch on the touchy subject of people that don't agree with transracial adoption and that's okay. We can't change anybody else's experiences, and we have to hear their experiences and why they don't agree with it because that is a reality and the history of adoption in our country.
Exactly. And I think that, there's the engagement, the famous Indian adoption project, right? We think about some complicated things like that that have happened and how some of some of the ideology behind the Indian adoption project of, taking Native American children and assimilating them into the mainstream culture or white culture, how some of those ideologies are also true for Black communities, Hispanic communities, at least historically. And so we can see by, I think, understanding this history, how Black communities, Hispanic communities, Asian communities may, without knowledge about how things have changed, have a bad taste in their mouth because they've maybe seen transracial adoption be harmful for somebody in their community. And so I think it's really important that especially prospective parents understand this so that they don't think that maybe these things are coming out of nowhere or that they're just baseless. I think we have to understand how adoption has been somewhat harmful to communities of color at times. And though that may not be the case anymore, and there's so many great people doing work to make sure that there's protection now. Um, but we do have to understand that because it wasn't so long ago that parents, grandparents wouldn't be telling these stories, right? So it's not so long ago that it's, in a textbook. It could have been said around a dinner table while a kid was growing up. And so we have to know these things and be aware of them and also be able to stand up for our children in a meaningful way.
So it is time now for Ask Anything segment. This question comes from Jessie. So Jessie is a transracial adoptee. So Jessie says, I am a transracial adoptee and sometimes I struggle with my identity. I grew up having no connection to my culture, and now that I am in my 20s, I want to find out more about my culture, but I don't know where to start. I feel this sense of loyalty to my parents, and I don't want to upset them by starting to connect more with my roots. How do you think I should go about having that conversation with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to be open and honest. And, like Isaac mentioned, we have to all put ourselves first sometimes. And this would be one of those scenarios where, every individual has a right to know their history and have a connection to their culture and their ethnicity. And I know that that can be a scary conversation, but that's one of those situations where if that's something that you want to explore and that you feel would help you better understand yourself and your own identity, then that's a conversation that, best comes from a place of openness and honesty, and, trying to build that connection with your family and say, these are reasons this is really important to me. And I hope that you'll either be supportive or even maybe help me in this journey.
I agree completely. And I would also just add, reach out to your adoption agency if you know the agency that you were adopted through to help maybe practice these conversations or bring someone else into the conversations. Especially, as an adult, I would hope that this would all go, in a loving way. But there may be fear surrounding that with somebody who's still in the home with their parents who may just not know how to have these conversations. So reach out for support and help too.
Definitely. Thank you so much, guys. And we will get back to our conversation.
So with a wide variety of openness in adoption too, what advice do you give adoptive families on helping their child feel connected to their birth culture?
Well, I think that one thing you can do just as a baseline when it comes to openness and I think and recognizing that they have a history that's not connected to you as their adoptive parents. It's find ways to incorporate that into your home. This isn't always possible, but I always suggest to adoptive parents, when possible, to have pictures of birth family. If you are going to have a even semi-open adoption, one that is healthy, one that it is appropriate to have pictures of them in your home, why not? Because we might think of them as we would think about a grandparent or an aunt and uncle. These are extensions of our family because we adopted this child. And so that's the one way that I think can be really powerful, to let it be known that these people are welcomed and also a part of our family too, that we see them that way. I think that you can also make it normal to attend things that would be related to the child's culture. So we might think about an African American festival, an Asian festival, Lunar New Year. These things that I think often transracial parents try to do later, right? They might see their child struggling, and then all of a sudden they're going to, some festival or a museum. I think it's really powerful to start that early, to start it before a child may remember, and have it be a normal part of your family culture. Instead of this thing that's almost reactionary or something that we're just doing for our child, it's something that you've decided that maybe because you adopted this child, it's just going to be a part of our family culture, what we do. That way, later, whether they do or don't want to go, it's not like, the end of the world, or it's not like you were maybe just doing it for them. This is something that you guys now, maybe the other siblings want to go now, right? So maybe they don't want to go to African, American festival, but the other siblings now have gone for the last 5 years. And so we're going to probably still go. And that I think makes it very normal, rather than this very kind of isolated feeling that I think transracial adoptees can feel. And I know that it's usually well intended, right? Transracial parents want to do that because they want to incorporate their child's culture. But I think the less natural you make that, the more isolating it can actually feel for a transracial child. So if it's a part of something that you guys do as a family, if it's a community that you've ingrained yourself into and now you have friends in and it's your community now also, I think that's how you really incorporate culture, how you really I think do transracial adoption really, really well.
I love that you talk about the importance of a sense of community, right? Like that saying, it takes a village just to raise a child. But I feel like that becomes even more important when you adopt transracially and you need to connect to a community that you may not yet be a part of. I love that. And, when thinking about the things that adoptive parents can do, right, to connect to communities that might take them out of their comfort zones, but are really important and beneficial, not just for their child, but for their own family and their family's health. What are some things that you would really urge adoptive parents to think about before they've ever adopted, if they're considering transracial adoption? Because there are going to be a lot of moments where they're taken out of their comfort zone and they have to consider that. What are some main takeaways or things that you would hope people would consider before adopting transracially or educate themselves on more?
Yeah. Well, I think before you adopt in general, you have to recognize that adoption is both a loss and a gain, right? So you have to come to adoption with the understanding that no matter what, no matter who you adopt, they have a family out there, they have a history out there, they have um, answers that they are going to probably eventually want to have about their story. And so you have to come to adoption with the basis of that. Yes, this can be a beautiful way to build a family. Yes, we can be in an amazing family and a beautiful, close family. But to do that, I will always have to acknowledge this loss in my child's life, and to really connect with my child and make them feel loved, to make them feel seen, to make them feel heard. I'm going to have to also acknowledge that loss in their life. So if you come to adoption with that kind of basis, I think that makes the next step of deciding whether to be a transracial family or a same race family relatively easy, because then you can just ask yourself, what am I willing to do? And that's really it. Transracial adoption does not have to be as complicated as we, I think, make it. I think it's just simply a question of, what is my lifestyle like right now? Am I willing to change it if I have to? If not, no. If yes, yes. It's really quite that simple, even though the daily tasks might not be as simple, but it is really that simple when it comes to the basis of, are you going to be a good prospective adoptive transracial parent or not? If you are a prospective parent and you say, hey, I don't go to the most diverse church, but I think that I'm going to be able to find a more diverse church, or we have a sister or brother church that's actually much more diverse. I think we will go there. We'll start getting ingrained in that community. We'll go through the adoption process so that once we adopt our child, they won't go to church and be the only Black person, right? I think it's really those things. It's like, are those the things that I'm willing to do? When my child gets old enough to experience things, am I willing to sit in hard conversations and maybe get mentorship and read books about how to engage in conversations about race? Is that something that I feel like I'm equipped to, my partner's equipped to do? Is that something that we will do? Is that something that we want to do? Because you don't have, like, before you've adopted, you don't have to do anything. You know what I mean? I always try to make that really clear to parents. Like, before you've adopted, you got no obligations. Nobody's telling you have to transracially adopt. Nobody's telling you have to have these conversations. You, in this pre-stage, really get to think about your life, your partnership, your community, your family, the things that might make it hard, the things that might make it easy, and say, does this make sense for the life that we want to live, the future that we want to have, the way we want to raise a family? And if the answer continually aligns with transracial adoption, then I think you can really thrive as a transracial parent. I think you can really do well. But you just have to make sure that you're not walking into it naively, that you're not thinking, this is just going to be like every other kind of raising a child, right? Because adoption inherently is not like raising a biological child, right? And when you add the layer of transracial adoption, you have to recognize the racial element, right? So you have two layers that you got to get through. And so if you're willing to do that, I think there's plenty of resources out there now that can make you do really well at it, that can walk you through it. We have some of them, but there's many other people who are creating really great stuff as well. And so if you want to do these things and you think you can commit to the changes that need to probably occur, then you should definitely pursue transracial adoption, and continue to learn on how to be a great parent.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And something that I really embrace and I love to see
Hmm.
is perspective, any parent perspective, biological parent perspective, adoptive parent, foster parent, wanting to grow your own culture no matter what race of child you have. Because we used to hear it so often of, well, we'll see who we adopt, who chooses us, we'll see what this looks like, and then we'll figure that out later. And it's like, we don't have to see who our child's going to be to go to a pride parade or to go support different museums and different cultures. So I think I've seen a lot more prospective parents embracing intersectionality and all sorts of different cultures before even knowing it. And that I think aligns with exactly what you were talking about of you would be good for this.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. That openness and that flexibility I think, is really an important part of adoption in general, but especially transracial adoption. I mean,
mhm.
even if you're a sand race adoptee, you don't know what, sexual identity they'll have. You don't know what they'll grow into. You don't know what kind of flexibility you'll need as a parent in general. I mean, anybody who's a parent knows you kind of get thrown into it, and you're gonna find out some stuff, and your child's gonna have interests that you may not expect. And so there's a lot of flexibility that's needed to be a parent in general. And so I think you're 100% right. It's like, why not start today, just experimenting with new things, finding new communities, and just seeing what feels right.
Absolutely. I'm curious if there's a particular moment or success story that you can share with us with your work with identity that stands out to you.
Yeah. Well, some of the most exciting work that we do is really, I think, directly with agencies. And so we have a partner program at Identity where adoption agencies actually can partner with us and provide our resources and our programming to their families for free through that partnership. And so we regularly have people who have never done their child's hair come to our Q&A, go through our video modules, and now they're able to confidently do their child's hair, right? And so because of that, it's opened up so many doors. In the state of Oregon, every foster and adoptive parent has free access to our stuff, thanks to our partnership with them. And so we have been able to find a way to make some of the resources that haven't existed historically in adoption very accessible to families. And I think that's that's one of the things that has meant the most to me. I think that if you adopt or if you foster, some of these resources only make sense to actually be included. Certainly, I'm happy when people go and buy our stuff on their own. I'm always happy that we can provide that as well. But when I know that a family is getting our resources directly through their agency, they're getting, this transracial adoption help, the hair care help, maybe some of our adoption after infertility stuff, and they're getting that support directly because of a partnership that we've made. I think that's really powerful. I think it really speaks to, adoption and ethical side of adoption, right? It's kind of like what you guys do with this education. You're making education more accessible to your families, right? And I think that the more that we can find ways to do that through the actual agency, through the actual state for families, the better. Because they're already going though. We got some balloons. No, that was great. It is a celebration. It's a celebration when family gets free resources, right? And I love that. I remember when I started Identity, I said, it's not what you usually say when you go in business, but I remember thinking like, I hope that most of the time people get our stuff for free. Like, I hope that most of the time people get our stuff for free. And that's really the goal, is that we're making, whether it be the training or the post placement, much more accessible, much more thorough. I mean, when you go onto we have a platform, the Thrive community that I talked about. If you're one of our partners, all your families, past and present, get access to that. Well, there's 24 hours of webinars, there's 9 hair care modules, there's all this kind of stuff that maybe they would have never had access to. And that to me is exciting. It is families getting the help that they need when they need it. Adoption is changing, getting younger. People on technology nowadays. They don't want to flip open a 200-page book. They want to go onto an online app. They want to be able to find the answers they're needing quickly. And I think that we're just on the beginning of making adoption and foster care education just extremely accessible and practical and very quick. Our practical guides are all less than 100 pages. You know what I mean? We are efficient in what we do intentionally, because we know that when you're raising a kid, you don't have time to read the 300-page book all the time. But you do need the answers. You do need the steps. You do need the advice. And so we do whatever we can to make that learning really easy and accessible, and of course, practical.
I love that you talk about the accessibility factor, right? Because that's so important in this
Huge.
day and age.
Huge.
When I think about the families that we work with, I think one of the main questions we get from a lot of our adoptive parents is, what should I look for? Are there signs? Are there cues maybe that my child is struggling with their racial identity? What would those look like? What should I look out for as an adoptive parent?
Yeah. I mean, you can look for, kids can be a little evident. Maybe sometimes they don't want you to drop them off directly in front of the school, right? A couple feet down. You might want to ask questions about why. Um, I find that a lot of the feelings about race are byproducts of deeper feelings, right? And so the looking different is a byproduct of being adopted, right? And so they actually go hand in hand most of the time for adoptees. It's not just that they want to talk about looking different, they want to talk about why they look different. Why am I not being raised by the people that gave birth to me? And so I think it's also, when we do see these things come up, acknowledging the both and of them. It could be maybe wanting to go on play dates with people, and they're only asking about the kids at school that look like them, right? This might be an indicator that they're kind of longing to be recognized. Not to say that they can't just be friends with those people, but if we start to notice patterns with our children, I think we can kind of start to put together pieces of like, oh, well, there's only 2 other Black kids in his class, and those seem to be the only people he wants to have play dates with. And so maybe there is a desire or a hurt or something that he's feeling. And so I would look for stuff like that. There are also maybe comments, there may be outbursts. I was reading a little bit that, many adopted kids may struggle academically as they enter these elementary years because they are overwhelmed with feelings about adoption. And in transracial situations, they may be overwhelmed with feelings of like looking different and being adopted. And so I would look at behavioral and academic issues also as signs of struggle, not always looking at them as signs of misbehavior or we might kind of easily sway to like ADHD, to not always just assume that these are byproducts of some kind of learning disability, but actually kind of digging deeper and wondering if maybe these issues are related to their adoption, their curiosity about the missing pieces in their lives, them understanding, once you're 6, 7, 8, watching other family dynamics. And so they are starting to understand how many pieces of themselves they may not know, like where their nose comes from or where their ears comes from, right? These things may be coming together for them and maybe showing up in excessively bad behavior, class disruption. It may be coming through by not doing homework or doing homework intentionally wrong, as well as it may show up in trying to hang out with only the classmates that look like them or making comments and jokes about race constantly. These are all different signs that your child may be struggling, maybe has curiosity, and may not even fully be able to articulate it yet. But if you start to ask them questions, you will see that their mind is wandering on these things.
Yeah, keeping those open lines of communication. And you said so beautifully, making sure you always look at a behavior through the adoption lens, right?
Yeah,
Like that's so
absolutely.
important as an
Yeah,
adoptive parent. Um,
absolutely.
Having been adopted yourself and being a transracial adoptee and, as a young adult, having maybe struggled a little with your own racial identity, what
Yeah.
advice would you give to young folks who are going through something similar and going through that same struggle?
Yeah. I think it's incredibly hard for adoptees to choose ourselves.
Mm.
I think that it's a really big challenge from a young age. And, I don't think I found the solution to this yet. Maybe there isn't one. But I think because adoption does have this beautiful side to it, many times adoptees grow up constantly hearing about how beautiful their story is and how great it is. And usually this is so well intentioned, right? It might not even be people saying you're so lucky. It's just the constant positivity about them being a part of the family. But a lot of this starts to shape our perception of love and happiness, right? And so we get into these adult years, into our young 20s, and we have all of our correlations to making other people happy involve separation, involve sacrificing, involve parts of ourselves not being recognized, right? And this is a hard thing to unlearn. That yes, our adoption can be a beautiful thing, and we can be a great family. We can be happy about adoption, but that love is also not connected to loss, and that happiness and joy is also not connected to loss, right? These are hard things to disconnect when your whole upbringing has been kind of surrounded in them. And that, again, I don't blame anybody for that. I think that's a really complicated thing because we do also want to recognize the beauty of the family being built this way. None of us are unhappy that we adopted our child or want to tell them that, right? But as children, we draw these lines, right? These are how things start to get connected for us. And so in adulthood, I think a lot of adoptees have to start learning how to choose themselves, how to give themselves permission to feel things, how to give themselves permission to want things on their own that's different from how other people want, right? And so there's an adoptee that has a quote. Her name is Anne Heffron, and she says that growing up, the idea of like asking for what she needed would be like peeling her own skin off. And I think many adoptees resonate to that feeling because we don't want to seem ungrateful. We don't want to seem like we're not happy about our lives. And our adoptive parents may have never said anything that would make us have to feel that way. It's just kind of a natural feeling that sometimes can get put in us. And I think that a lot of the young adult adoptee journey is learning how to step out into that light, how to ask for what we need, how to believe that what we need is okay, and that we don't always have to sacrifice ourselves. And a lot of that when it comes to racial identity is choosing to do the new thing, right? Choosing to go be in a community with people that look exactly like you, even though that might be the scariest thing you can think of, right? That's what I had to do. It was a scary thing for me, but that's what I did. And that was an act of choosing myself, choosing what I needed, which was unusual for me, right? And so I think that, a lot of young adoptees need a lot of grace. They need a lot of patience because they're navigating a lot of hard emotions. But the first step to finding, I think, peace and healing is choosing yourself in the small ways and then the big ways.
Absolutely. And So well said, and so much to think about for parents and prospective parents. And um, we just want to share our joy with our children and our happiness that our family is so loving and all of
Yeah.
that, but addressing our own insecurities about parenting and adoption. And um, that's
Exactly.
a big ask and it's a lot, but gosh, will it help a child with their identity growing up and that communication and open communication? And even if my feelings are a little hurt by any of your thoughts and feelings, I'm always open to hugging you, listening to you, being here as your parent.
Yes. And I think that is the pathway to the connection that most adoptive parents are looking for.
Yeah.
Most adoptive parents they're scouring the internet. They're trying to find the answer. They're reading the TBRI books. They're doing whatever it takes, right? But the actual probably answer to most of their problems is actually just to sit in the hard moment with their child, to just let their child say, I'm very hurt that my birth mother gave me up for adoption. And to actually sit in that moment with them, let them know that it's okay, that they feel that way, and that you're still willing to be in that moment with them. And I think that will do much more for your relationship with your child than a lot of the stuff that you could read out there. Not saying that that stuff is bad. You should definitely read that stuff, right? I think people have done excellent research, but I think just it can sometimes the easiest thing is the thing. And that is the thing. It's going to be hard in the moment, but it's just being in that moment with your child. I think the connection that you'll build and notably build quicker will be very, very significant.
Agreed. Isaac, can you share with us how you hope to see identity and the adoption and foster landscape evolve in the next 1, 5, 10 years?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we're really, I jokingly say that I want to be an adoptive parent, but I will not be an adoptive parent until I go to my adoptive training and it's all the stuff that we've created. And that's what we're doing. You know what I mean? That's the thing that we're working on. We're working on making transracial adoption education that is not only very understandable and fills in all the theory, all the things that people need to know, but actually really helps people walk through the journey. And so I think we really aggressively have focused on post-placement stuff, but we are hoping to create more stuff that people can use in that licensing area, in that home study section as well, like some of our assessments that are coming. And so we'll have a series of assessments in 2025 that agencies can start using to, whether it's for transracial, whether it's for adoption after infertility, we'll have some adoption readiness assessments. These are all things that are missing from the adoption world that really need to exist. And so my goal with identity is that we're in every corner of it. We're in every inch of it. And that no matter what issue that you're having, you can turn to our page, our content somewhere and find an answer for what you're going through, or at least feel seen. I think that's a really powerful part of what you guys are doing here through content is even if there isn't, an answer that we're giving to somebody, they're at least feeling seen, right? They're feeling like, oh, it's not just me struggling. And I think that's a powerful part of our content. And so I think on our resources side, on our book side, I hope that one day we look across the United States and every agency is using them. And then I think on our content side, I hope that we have such a volume of content that no matter who you are in the adoption world, you feel seen through it. You find your person through it. And we're going to keep working towards that goal each and every day. We are 3 years in. We have about 12 agencies that use our stuff, two of them being states. And so we're going to keep pushing forward. And hopefully, as each day and each month goes by, more and more families are getting access to our stuff for free, feeling seen and feeling connected deeper with their child.
Yeah, Isaac, I mean, I love that you all not only provide so many resources, but you really are helping to provide a community for people, a space for people to be in and learn and connect, which I think is so important and so beneficial.
Because the Facebook groups are a nightmare,
Yeah.
right? We all know the horrors of the Facebook groups, right? And so that's why ours is a little bit different and not on Facebook, right? It's you can't foster learning when you're scared to ask questions. And I've heard some of the wildest questions you can imagine. And I try to never make anybody feel bad for them because we have to learn through it. And if adoptive parents are just holding all these questions in and then they're looking on the Facebook group that they're going to be helpful and they're just seeing the last person who asked a question get attacked, it doesn't help anybody. And so, yes, it has to be safe. It has to be a community, and it has to be meaningful to the parents so that they can ask the real questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a space that we want everyone to have access to. So can you just remind our listeners, where's
Yeah.
the best place to go?
Absolutely. You can go to identitylearning.co, it's CO, and you can kind of check out everything that we have there. I'm on Instagram at Isaac_Etter. And then our business Instagram is going to be identity.learning. Connect anywhere. Our YouTube is also identity.learning. And so, yeah, just connect anywhere and feel free to message me. I keep things very open. We always are very open to feedback. So, if you get any of our guides, there's a note from me at the end that says, if you felt like anything was missing from this guide, send me an email, we'll add it. And so definitely, even if you listen to this, you have follow-up questions, shoot us a message. We're really open to talking and building that community deeper.
Thank you so much. And we will link all of that as well so that people have access to it. Isaac, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being here, for engaging with us and letting our listeners hear your story and the work that you do. Do you have parting thoughts? Anything else you want to share with anyone listening?
No, I mean, I think this was amazing. I'm happy that we got to be here and we got to do this. I think this was a lot of fun. I love a good podcast. And so this was great.
Thank you
Thank you so
so
much.
much.
What a great conversation with Isaac today. Nicole, what was your main takeaway from our conversation?
The importance of listening to those who have lived the experiences that your children may experience as well is so important. I am going to be getting the guides from Isaac about having conversations about race and racism and racial identity. And I do believe that should welcome intersecting identities into their life, their culture, in any way that they can to create a welcoming culture with your child, no matter their racial background, their adoption status or not. So that was my main takeaway from that, but using the actionable resources to be able to start these conversations. Alyse, what about you? What is your parting thought from this episode?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Nicole. And I think just the importance of education, educating yourself as either a pre-adoptive parent or while you are currently parenting a child. Education is a lifelong journey, and it not only helps benefit you, but it helps benefit your child, learning how to help best support them in getting connected with their culture, learning more about their culture. Is only going to connect you to them more. And I think it's just so important to be open to having those conversations with your child and helping them navigate that throughout their life.
Thank you for joining us for this enlightening conversation with Isaac Etter. His journey as a transracial adoptee and his work through identity bring a wealth of insight into the complexities of adoption, identity, and belonging.
Yes, if you found today's discussion valuable, we encourage you to learn more about Isaac's work at Identity and to continue exploring ways to support the unique needs of adoptees.
Check out the links that we've provided for Identity. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or watch podcasts at. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Adoptions from the Heart for more updates and discussions. We would love to hear your thoughts and questions and welcome them.
Yes, and thank you to Isaac for joining us on this episode. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in as well. We look forward to connecting with you in our next episode.